Something was wrong, we felt it inside. Something told us do not comply. Turn off the news, turn off the TV. It's time to think, get off your knees. We tried to warn loved ones, oh did we try? We tried to save lives, but we were denied. Sadly we failed and many of them died. We were kicked to the side, we did not hide. We took to the streets, we would not comply. Our conscience told us this was the world's largest lie. At first we were few, but we shortly grew. Melbourne streets saw sights that had never been seen. We fought for our rights, for all to be free. People thrown to the ground, pepper spray to the face. No matter what age, we were locked up and caged. Then the guns came out, they had no care. They shot their own people, running in fear, unarmed and peaceful. We stood for our rights, they would not stop us. We would not give up the fight. We were locked out of cafes, our families withdrew. No Christmas, no birthdays, no celebrations we knew. We were germs, enemies, a danger to you. You watched the counts on mainstream news. No further would you look, we were all cooked. Deluded, brainwashed, segregation we lived through, whilst you lived your life without any clue. People thrown to the ground, pepper spray to the face. No matter what age, we were locked up and caged. Then the guns came out, they had no care. They shot their own people, running in fear, unarmed and peaceful. We stood for our rights, they would not stop us. We would not give up the fight. Something was wrong, we felt it inside. Something told us do not comply.
Good evening and welcome to Mantra Moments. Tonight we have Angela. Now, Angela is a film and gamer classifier, a candidate for Fair Go Australians in the Upper House in South Australia elections, and a dedicated mum. For the past 3 years, Angela has been challenging sexually explicit books for children in libraries and schools. Angela has recently returned from Washington, D.C., where she joined forces with organisations from 7 different countries. Let's welcome Angela. Let's get her on. Hi, Angela. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's good to see you. Just having a few technical problems. Sorry. Okay, so tell us, how did you get involved with all this?
A few years ago, well, I'm a mum, so a few years ago I was homeschooling my own daughters and looking at the public libraries because we needed to have our own resources. I noticed these pornographic or sexually explicit books in full front display. And I started to question, am I being old-fashioned or is this not okay? So, I spoke to a few different parents and I thought, you know what, I'm not being old-fashioned. This isn't right. They shouldn't have these explicit books. And it wasn't just, we're hearing about it overseas and seeing all of that, what was happening. But I thought, well, I want to have a look into this. So I decided, I think it was about 3 years ago now, I spoke at my local council and we got some sample images from different books. I presented a deputation on sex resources for children in our public libraries, and I wasn't allowed to do the presentation as a PowerPoint presentation because it was too sensitive for their YouTube. So I was able to give handouts. After that, I followed up because in South Australia, we have what's called the one card system, where I'm not sure how other states work, but in any public library across South Australia, you can go to any public library on the one card system, borrow a book, and return it to any part of the state in any library. And you can self-check out. I think usually councils oversee their own libraries, but this works in the whole state, and it's a bit more difficult. But I ended up writing to the public library services because there was a number of books that I found out that weren't classified at the time. I wasn't a classifier at the time. I was just a regular mum. And I took the couple of books to the police station as well. One of those was a book series. So one of the book series, it was actually in the graphic novels area. It wasn't one of those educational books. It was a comic book style book called The Boys. And that one there, plus some other books, and the police officer didn't know what to do. And the images I showed him from these books there was sexual violence, and there was very clear depiction. It wasn't just a really bad cartoon drawing. It's fairly clear that images. There was images of orgies, and there was a depiction of bestiality.
What age group is this targeted at?
Well, it was just in the graphic novels area. So it could have been any child or teen who would go on the graphic novels. It sat right next to your Superman and your DC comic books. So it was on the same areas. That was just one of the books. There was other ones that I saw that I challenged later on, and I'll talk about that later. So there was a number of books, and then there was another book in the that I presented. So the book's called Let's Talk About It. Now that one's targeted to teens, but in the front cover it said, "To whoever needs it, whatever your age," and it was on full front display. And that book there shows absolutely everything on instructions on how to masturbate and the use of sex toys, and it also shows instruction on how to take selfies, like how to do sexting safely. So it says in there, I'll quote from the book, because I put images of that book on my Facebook page, and I copped a Facebook restriction just by sharing some of the images. So it says on there, get friendly with photo editing software and apps. And it shows a cartoon drawing of a female, covering their face and covering their breasts a little bit and just taking nude shots and things like that. Or there was another section about porn, and it says, have interviews and watch interviews with their favorite porn performers and go to the websites they recommend. So these are the sorts of books. And then you've got the other books for younger audiences. So there was a book called The Amazing True Story of Our Babies Are Made. That sat in the children's area, and it had a recommended target audience for reception to year 2, 5 to 7-year-olds. And it gave full detailed description and depiction of intercourse, and it explained what it was and how it works and everything, is with full nudity and everything. That one there was actually also on the Premier's Reading Challenge book list. So in South Australia, we have what's called the Premier's Reading Challenge, where it gives an incentive for children in schools and also for homeschoolers who register too, for different year levels, to read X amount of books per year. And then at the end of the reading challenge, children receive this medallion. Well, this book was added onto the Premier's Reading Challenge list as well. So it definitely wasn't part of the curriculum, but part of that reading challenge. If, children picked up that particular book. So there's a range of books from children's to, teens and everything in between, and graphic novels that I found. So the police officer didn't know what to do. He said, call legal services or go to the ombudsman. I rang up the classification board, and because I knew that these books had not been classified, and I can explain that a bit later on how that works and why books don't get classified. But the classification board said to contact the licensing enforcement branch. Now, that's a branch of SAPOL, SA Police. I did also email the libraries, the Public Libraries Board in South Australia, and they held a view that books should be free from censorship. And regards to children, it's the rights and responsibilities are the parents, but they won't take any responsibility for having anything pornographic or sexually explicit easily accessible to children. Anyway, the licensing enforcement branch saw the depictions, saw those, the book series, The Boys, they saw the bestiality, all of those things, and did nothing. What they did was they said, go back to your local council. So they sent me on one big loop. It took months for that. And I don't know if people have heard of a man from Queensland called Bernard Gaynor. He challenged a book called Gender Queer. This was a few years ago. So he was able to get... We can go through that later on. So I was in contact with... Yes. I was in contact with Bernie, a few years ago, and he was able to get The Boys through enforcement in Queensland referred for classification review. And out of that book series, there were 6 books in that series, graphic novel series, that were classified through enforcement. 3 of them came back on par with an adult magazine with an R rating, category 1. So that means legally across Australia, that book has to be wrapped and sealed. It cannot be sold or displayed or lent without it being wrapped or sealed. So law enforcement in South Australia did nothing to refer. Anyway, what happened was I wrote back to the public libraries services across South Australia, and I said, look, these books are now legal restrictions. 3 of them are a category 1. And they said, it's the rights and responsibilities, the same scripted response. And I wrote back and I sent them parts of the South Australian legislation that states there's a $5,000 penalty for the public display of a category 1. Now, they didn't write back, but they removed every single copy of those books across South Australian libraries. So, you have to know your legislation and what the law says. Why didn't law enforcement do it? Well, that's another issue. I'm not making excuses up for them, but I think books are on the lower end of their agenda at the moment. They've probably got so much to do, but that's still...
Yeah, it's pornographic.
It's pornographic.
It's porn, yeah.
That's right.
It's not just a book.
If you look at the legislation, and I'll go through the classification side of it later, because the image, what it was a woman being mounted by a dog and people watching and cheering. So they should never, ever glorify bestiality. It should actually be refused classification. It should never be depicted. That book series, there's a Netflix series, which is a lifelike version of it, called The Boys. I haven't seen it, but what I've heard is that particular episode called Herogasm, in the Netflix series, they never show all of the stuff that's in the books. A lot of it's just implied, it's behind closed doors, or it's spoken about, because it would never, ever be allowed in a film or game. So somehow the books are just, they're getting away with it. But probably for how many years, I reckon more than 5, even up to 10 years, that book series sat in our libraries unrestricted, not wrapped and sealed. So that was the first lot we were able to get classified. And over the last few years, I've been petitioning a South Australia petition out. In South Australia, we have to do a parliament petition on paper. We're the only state that has to do it by paper. So in one way, it gives me more time. I don't have a time frame until it gets presented. So I need 10,000 signatures. I've over the halfway mark now. It's very slow moving because I'm not an organisation. When I started it, I was just a mum, but I've spoken at so many events. I've taken copies of these books. And going back to that book, that Premier's Reading Challenge book, I showed it to at many events, and one of it was an education forum, and I showed it to a lot of people, and there happened to probably be some members of parliament in that audience when I spoke at that forum. And not long afterwards, it was deleted from the Premier's Reading Challenge list. So it probably would have been removed from schools, not the public libraries, but at least it was a starting, getting that book removed because it wasn't age appropriate. And I just want to be clear with people, I don't believe in book banning. This is not about book banning or censorship. This is about drawing the line to where books should be. There should be a level of restriction for books that should be classified and sitting at that higher level classification. But the whole process I went through, and then also Let's Talk About It. So that book that goes through absolutely everything, that almost got me a ban on Facebook. I went through a classification challenge where I decided I'm going to apply for classification as a general member of the public. And so I had to register online, of course, on their website for that. And I went through this process and I applied for a fee waiver, but they didn't grant me the fee waiver. I ended up paying the fee out of my own pocket. It cost $790. And one of the reasons why they didn't grant the fee waiver was, because I'm not a distributor, or I'm not a not-for-profit organisation, or there was no mainstream attention about it. There wasn't enough public interest. That was one of their things. So I ended up it followed on from that. I ended up actually getting interviewed from Sky News, but I couldn't even get my money back. It didn't work out. But anyway, the classification board decided that book should remain unrestricted. They could have imposed a condition where it could be available for 15 and older with a recommendation with an M rating, and they left it unrestricted after all that long process. So that was, and then I did, and then about a year later, I did a second deputation that I was asked to do one at a different council from people that got to know me. I co-deputied at Port Adelaide and Enfield. And I included all of this extra information, with the laws and everything around the submittable publications and the fines and penalties for having those sorts of books in libraries. And I put the sample images, and because I wanted an audit, because I already found books that had been classified and were R-rated and needed to be removed. So we should go for, have this audit. And the week before, I think it was the Friday before the deputation, the acting CEO at the time sent me an email requesting the removal of the images of the handouts because people attending a public meeting might find them offensive. So, and elected members needed to feel safe. So they were the only ones seeing the images. It wasn't even the people in the gallery. So that was, how ridiculous is that? That just explains the reason for having, if general members, adult members in our communities find these images in books offensive, then they must be classified. I was also talking to another lady in South Australia who did a deputation not too long ago in Mount Barker, and she read from Welcome to Sex, This is just very recently, a couple of weeks ago. And she was just reading a few lines from it. And the man interrupted her and said, well, you can't read that book because there's children in the gallery. And I need a duty of care. I need to protect those children. So, she said, well, this book has a recommendation for children. So, it's just, I understand that from that point of view. We have to protect children, but that's the level it is. They contradict themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, a deep dive into, I wanted to know how do these books end up unrestricted on the shelf. So I did a deep dive into the whole process from start to finish. But the other thing I want to mention too is the library policy. So if you go into your local library and you agree to their terms and conditions on using their online their computers, or if you use their Wi-Fi, they have these policies. And part of those policies are, it says in there, it is illegal and prohibited to look up anything that's pornographic, sexually explicit, or offensive. But yet you can go to the shelf, or your child could go to the shelf and pick up a book that's pornographic or sexually explicit, and they can self-check out. So what they call illegal and prohibited is different when it's online compared to on the shelf. And I use that in my argument, but I bet my last deputation last year, it should be for 5 minutes, and then afterwards a few questions. It went for half an hour. I was bantering back and forth with a couple of counsellors they were really trying to discredit, and I knew everything inside and out. If you like, I can go through how a manuscript, I can try to explain that so people understand how these books end up on the shelves unrestricted.
Yes, please.
All right, so it's the authors and the publishing companies who pre-catalog books. They select the target audiences, they select the categories. The librarians and teachers do not select the target audiences. They do not select the categories. Like the category I'm talking about, when you go to your public library and you do a category search and you search up sex instruction for children, it's not the librarians that create that category, it's the publishing houses.
Yeah.
And it's the international publishing houses, so people understand. It's a thing called cataloging in publishing. So even whether you're self-published author or whether you publish traditionally, you purchase a barcode, which is the book's identifier. It's the ISBN number, and they assign all the categories and the target audiences. Librarians don't order individual books, neither do schools. Normally what happens is, and I used to volunteer at my children's school before I homeschooled, and I volunteered in the library. So I learned how to catalogue or add books to cataloguing collections. They add books to collections. So we use the same system in most Western countries. We use the Dewey Decimal System, and we use the Library of Congress system. They're the ones we use in Australia as well, and most Western countries. There's probably a few other systems, but they're the two most popular ones. They order books through a standing book ordering system. So it's the distributors who pre-select the packs. It's not the educators, it's not the librarians. They can order individual books by request, but usually it comes pre-selected. I don't know who's doing this selection and there's no oversight on that. I'm not sure who that is. But librarians and teachers merely just add books to collections.
Right.
So that's what. Don't get angry at the teachers for introducing books. There should be some sort of committee. The Department for Education should know what they're bringing into schools and approving certain books. But and librarians, they're not going out of their way too much to, order certain books. They just come pre-selected most of the time, except for on request. The other way is authors. If you're an Australian author, it doesn't matter what country the publishing house is that you publish with, you're required by law to make what's called a legal deposit. So you would donate a book to the National Library and to your state. You make a legal deposit, and if you make donations to different libraries, public libraries, the government will, through a lending scheme, they will reimburse you your out-of-pocket expenses. So whatever you should have earned in royalties, they can reimburse you back. There's probably a threshold of some sort. So, if I was the author of Welcome to Sex, I could donate, if she's the Australian author, donate 100 copies or how many copies, as long as it doesn't meet the threshold, I'll get reimbursed back by the government. Speaking of Welcome to Sex, many people probably were aware, I think last year, that book was shortlisted on the Prime Minister's Literary Award. Yes, so that she won I think it was a $5,000 prize for that book. So, that's the type of thing, that's just our government and what they're rewarding at the moment. What I found with the cataloguing systems in South Australia, when there was multiple copies of one book, like The Amazing True Story of How Babies Were Made, because I could see it on a whole system, I noticed that some librarians, a few put them in the parenting collections and a few in the adults sections, some in the teens, but the majority in the children's area. So some librarians were actually changing the shelf locations. They were reading the books and doing the right thing. They were putting it in the parenting collections. It shouldn't be in the children's areas. And some thought it shouldn't be in the children's areas. They're placing them in the teens areas at least. But so there's some librarians are trying to do the right thing.
Angela, I know people that went in and did that.
Yes. So, that it seems like a longer battle. When it comes to classification, so what happened afterwards, because I went through that classification process with that book, Let's Talk About It, I received an email last year with an invitation to do this classifying training program for film and games. And I think it was just a generic email that was sent out to production people. And so I thought, why not? I'll just do this course. I've never studied arts law. I've never worked in production, but I'm just going to do it anyway. And it didn't cost me anything. And I got a 90% pass rate, which I needed to become a classifier for film and games. The accreditation allows me to work in-house. So this is the other thing that's changing with film and games now. The classification board don't have to classify film and games as much as what they used to. It's, people who work for Netflix can hire their own in-house classifiers and classify their own production, or people producing stuff. And it's like a self-checkouting system. And I think the way the classification board is going to move in a way that they might just oversee a lot more of, classification, and maybe deal with a high level stuff, like anything that should be X-rated or, really, I'm not sure, but that's how it's going to. I think that's the feel, that's where it's going when it comes to film and games, because there's so much content coming out at the moment. That's where they're probably going. But films and games, they don't get classified. They get classified differently to books. So with film and games, you have your categories. You got your G, PG, M, MA, and R, or your category 1 and 2s. In books, they might give a recommendation for an M rating, and they have your category 1, which is your R rated, and your category 2, which is your X rated, and then you have your RC, which is your refused classification. But you have to assume that every single book in libraries and schools has never been classified by the Australian Classification Board. It's automatic. They don't do it. Normally what happens is they're supposed to be submitted, which is called a submittable publication. So any book that is unsuitable for a minor to see or read, that would cause a reasonable adult to be offended, they're the sorts of criteria for a submittable publication. So, and other countries don't classify books. So the USA or Canada, they have, their freedom of their First Amendment rights. So by law, they don't have to classify books, but they do for film and games. But you just have to assume, and historically they have classified graphic novels in the past, especially some of those Japanese manga type books, because some of those could be quite pornographic or quite violent as well. But they don't classify a lot. And in the Classification Act, there's a section in there that talks about exemptions to classification, and that's around whether it's educational merit, scientific or artistic merit. And there's a list of things in that table. And even with film and games as well. So teachers will show students videos or games or even books that haven't been classified. There's an exemption to the rule, but the exemption, what people need to realize is, yes, those videos don't have to be classified for teaching, for educational purposes, unless the film or documentary is likely to be M rated and above, then it must be submitted for classification. And that's what they miss out. When you look at the teacher resources and their guidelines and their rules, they're missing out that section of the legislation. And I've challenged that with the Department for Education in South Australia on a number of videos. And the Department for Education have sort of denied certain videos, or we have, this video was only showed once, we've dealt with it, it's never going to be shown ever again. So there's different things around classification that's happening, and I'm trying to do what I can, put pressure on the whole system, but it seems like it's just going to be this long-term pushback and fight to do the right thing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we appreciate you doing it, believe me. Thank you. So you ended up in Washington, D.C.
Yes. So I started working with another mum from South Australia, Rachel, and we connected up with different people from overseas and created this international coalition. So the coalition is a number of organized grassroots organizations who have a similar sort of focus on protecting children and fighting back against these ideologies and everything like that. So there was how many? I think 7 countries that joined us on this trip to DC. So we had, obviously Australia, but then we've got there was some from USA, Canada, Ireland, Wales, England, and New Zealand. So that was the 7 countries. And if you want to put up any of the photos, I can talk through the one with the meeting, maybe with the whole group. Yeah. So that one there. So that's the group there. And we went with DC. We brought 16 packs. Now, I don't know who's heard of Alfred Kinsey or the Kinsey Institute. So Alfred Kinsey wrote a book called The Sexuality of the Human Male. And in that, and I'll read sections from that chart. In that book and that science, there's a chart in there called Table 34. And it goes into examples of multiple orgasms in pre-adolescent males. Now, the youngest is a 5-month-old baby, had 3 orgasms. And then there was, one 4-year-old had 26 orgasms in 24 hours. So that's the type of research. And because of Kinsey's research into sexuality is the reason why UNESCO, so the UN branch of education and science, have adopted, which Australia have adopted their policies, by the way, and the World Health Organization, when they say that children are sexual from birth, this is the research it's coming from. So we had these packs addressed to Congress to give out 16 packs with letters and explaining, and our friends from America, they done so much research over the years, and there was a bill from the 90s which would investigate Alfred Kinsey back then, but it never passed. So what we did was we presented this old bill, and we're hoping with those meetings that we had, the Congress would actually revive that bill to investigate Alfred Kinsey. And I will give out some background on how it links to Australian curriculum and Australian schools. There's a workbook that a teacher gave me, a handbook that trains staff on how to do gender affirmation, for example. And if you look back on the references, and this is in South Australia schools, a school teacher handbook, if you look down the references, they reference their research from La Trobe University. Well, La Trobe University have this document called the Rainbow Tick Guide. And if you look at those references, they reference Kinsey. So everything gets back down to Kinsey or to UNESCO and back to Kinsey again. So anyway, so with all those people there, we had such a presence going around speaking to the staffers of congressmen and women, and a couple of senators too. And we were just going around from office to office and having these meetings. And they've never seen an international organization that large before going around. And we gave them out these packs, this bill, we're hoping to get it revived. And during government lockdown, a shutdown afterwards, once it opens back up, we're hoping the communication, we'll hear back from them soon on how that's progressing. This, so it's, we're hoping that, I'm just trying to think of the word and I can't think of it. Correspondence, that's it. We'll find out soon with our correspondence that we had. But it was such a, just a whole day of going around office to office and bringing awareness to Kinsey and hoping to revive this bill or rewrite a new version of it. And it seems like we're going to get some feedback. And then a few days later, the group got together. So in DC at that particular time, the World Health Organization, if you want to get up another photo, I can go through that.
This one, is it?
Yeah, so the World Health Organization, they had their regional meeting at that particular time while we were there. So we got together, and there might be another photo of the whole group, and we held our own press release where each of the members, we stood in front of a microphone, we recorded it, and I'll get some of the footage out at a later date. I want to put it all together as one, but I do have the individual ones. And we all spoke 5 minutes each. We spoke truth outside the World Health Organization's regional meeting, America's meeting. And that was interesting because while we were doing that and filming that, the World Health Organization security were coming around to sort of watch what we were doing. So that was fun. Is there one of the whole group there?
No.
That's all right. So that was a good day. We set up our cameras and we spoke truth about, because what we're experiencing in Australia with the sexualization of children in schools and some of the stories that we're hearing about what's happening in schools, and it's not happening in every single school, but we're hearing so many different stories. It's happening in other countries. We're all having the same fight.
Yes.
That was the whole point of it. And later on we joined. So this is Kimberly Fletcher from Mums for America. So the other part of the trip was, I don't know if people heard of Mums for America, but it was because of Mums for America and Kimberly Fletcher that President Trump and their policies, that President Trump was able to make those changes with the curriculum and school policies in schools. And I was invited to speak at the launch because Mums for America were launching their next chapter, which is Mums for Freedom. So they're starting to increase internationally now, different chapters.
Oh, wonderful.
So I was invited to speak at the Mums for Freedom release, and that was in the America First studios. So I did an interview with Kim Fletcher in their studios, America First Studios, and also I did a separate press release with them to help launch that as well. So that was a lot of fun to be able to do that. Made some really good connections there. Yeah, it's really good to launch that because they have a similar focus. They're focused on, the things that affect mothers, families, children, and creating policies and they have such a connection within the White House, and they do such amazing work. Mums for Freedom, Mums for America, and what they're doing. So, it was a really good way of connecting with them. We made so many good connections. There was another time where we, Kimberly invited us to this meet and greets, and there was with the MAGA and Turning Point people. We went to the Waldorf Hotel for drinks, and we got to meet different people. They did do like we had some drinks, but they did speak about Charlie Kirk, and it was the first meeting, after all that, where they got to honor him. But also it was just a good way of meeting different people who were going to run in the next, state elections, and just different. It was interesting. Like, I think they found us very interesting because we were together as a group who were there for drinks, and they're like, they've never seen an Australia, like in one group, because there was 4 of us that were at that time that went for drinks. One from Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and Canada, and they were like, "Wow, that is, having different people, internationally working together." They're very interested in what we were doing, and made some really good contacts. Penny and I, Penny's from New Zealand, from Let Kids Be Kids, New Zealand. We actually got a second meeting set up, thanks to Penny, with Congresswoman's Marjorie Taylor Greene's office. So his staff, her staffer is named Ed, and we got back for a second meeting, and sat down and I spoke to him about the publishing companies. And that's the other thing I would like to talk about. And I said to him, I went through the publishing guidelines, and because Penguin, Random House, or Kindle, all of those, if you look at the user submission guidelines, they're not supposed to accept manuscripts which are pornographic, obscene, offensive, or sexually explicit. So, and also Kindle are not supposed to sell anything that's sexually explicit or pornographic or obscene. So they're selling these books and producing them against their own guidelines. And I showed him the images, and he wrote down the name of the author in the book. He was quite interested in that. He said because of their First Amendment rights, they might not be able to do their investigation, but the boys that might be crossing over a certain, law, because they have their obscenity laws, that they might be able to look into that. But it affects all of us because a lot of our books in Australia are, published internationally, and they're sold internationally. They're not just Australian branches. So, so we'll see what happens when America reopens up. I do have a bit of correspondence with him, so I'm hoping there's some sort of investigation. But when you look at the history of it all comes back to Kinsey. Everything, how his research and quote science shaped from the 40s, shaped publishing companies and how they view education, how they view sexuality. I'm looking at a comment there. Money talks. Pretty much. And speaking of monies, I think if you look back to the Kinsey Institute and his back then and his research, I think it was sponsored. I'm fairly certain it was sponsored by Rockefeller. So there's no surprise there. Everything goes back down to the same, people who sponsor the same types of studies and everything like that. But I think we're going to keep going as an international group. We'll still try to, focus on different things as well and try different things in different countries. Whatever works in one country, we might try to adopt it in another and see what works, But, bringing awareness is the thing that we can only do is just help parents navigate in our own countries.
Yeah. So what do you think we can do just as everyday people? What do you think we can do to bring awareness to everyone else, every other day people, if that makes sense?
Well, first of all, teachers don't explain, like when you say, your kids are, learning about sex ed, comprehensive sexuality education isn't just puberty and human reproduction. So I would be encouraging parents to write to your children's school and ask them, can I see the curriculum? I want to know exactly what you're showing. And I did that, and I know other parents have, and teachers hide behind copyright laws. They will say, we can't send you out the curriculum and the contents because it's copyrighted. And then you could say, well, can you invite me and I'll sit with you in the meeting. Because what happens is you got these third-party providers that either provide the information or teach the teachers. The comprehensive sexuality education isn't just, like I said, isn't just puberty and human reproduction. So they talk about, they're going to, they'll put kissing and cuddling in the same category as anal sex when they talk about sexual behaviors. So that's the problem, is when they're trying to say, kissing's on almost, or they talk about porn, like it depends on which year level it is. They'll have conversations, like group conversations on porn world versus real world sex, and what the students might be asked. And I've seen some of the curriculum content on what do you think is who has watched porn, and does it give, and who has had real life sexual experiences, and does it meet up to your expectations, or although guys are under safety, and that's the sort of conversations. Or if it goes into the trans queer agenda, they might talk about activism. Imagine that you're a non-binary alien. How would you come out on Facebook? So they have these. Yeah, so that's the sort of activities. Or imagine if you're a female, imagine yourself in the male body, and how does that feel? So that's what these queer clubs would talk about. But it's not just in health. They take a whole school approach, and that's the problem. So if you're learning history, they'll somehow throw it into history. In English, they'll put it in English. They'll put it in maths. Somehow they find a way to put it in maths and science. It's not just health anymore, health and well-being. In Australia, they use what's called the Respectful Relationships Program and the Keeping Safe School Program. So it's, and then with those two programs, it comes under the guise of safety, and it starts at age 3 because it's starting now in kindy, and kindy starts at age 3. But they talk about, gender affirmation, and each state has their own rules, but they have their own plans as well. So there's so many different areas to look at, not just curriculum. And then you've got educators and teachers that will, it's in their policies under duty of care. So if they believe that a child is more likely to harm themselves, they can actually socially transition them without the parent knowing.
Yes. And you know what I find is really difficult, is when I speak to parents about this, they go, oh, well, we've got our children under control. We know, we're fine. My children wouldn't do that. And I'm just like, but what about the other kids? And how do they know what their children are being indoctrinated with at school anyway?
Yeah.
They don't. And they don't. A lot of them just think they've got it under control at home. But that's not necessarily right.
I don't think we're going to wake up people who are not ready to wake up to the agenda. But, you can look. You can just ask them questions, have a look. Maybe not all schools, maybe not all teachers are teaching as explicitly. Some might not be. And there's a few good teachers out there. So just keep that in mind. Not everyone's teaching the same stuff at the same levels.
Yes.
So we need to be fair on that. And it's not just public schools. It's in the faith-based schools too. How some are teaching made in the image of God. I have no idea, but somehow they seem to put, sexual identity in that. But they might not all be teaching at the same level. So it's really, I would encourage parents to join up with other parent and friends groups, have those conversations, sit and ask the teachers, look, can we see what's in the curriculum? Go to your public library, have a look at these books. It won't take you long to find the few. So you need to go with the LGBT books, or especially the transgender queer books. They will be in your culture areas, and with the puberty and human reproduction books, which is where the sex instruction books are hidden, under health and well-being. So they won't, it's the same sort of cataloging sections. Have a look, check it out for yourself, and but the problem is we don't like to feel like helicopter mums hovering over our kids, making sure they might accidentally pick up a pornographic book. It's okay for children at the right ages to learn about sex and puberty, but I don't believe it should be made compulsory. Parents are being told it's been made mandatory or compulsory. By law, they actually can withdraw your child out. So you just have to write a letter to the school and say, look, I want to withdraw my child out from the experience of sex ed, and it's not compulsory, it's not mandatory. So that's, and you're allowed to do that. But that's, I was talking Craig Cole on his Leave the Kids Alone. He's got really good resources on his website. He's got a template letter, which are good, very good for that. Look, I reckon you just have to do the best as you can. I know there's a lot of parents who are homeschooling and opting their children out.
Yes.
I think we need to, there's so much information out there, but trying to force people to have a look at it, you really can't. I think there's so many horrific stuff out there people don't want to believe is actually happening, or it's that bad, or they just trust. And the thing is, teachers, I mean, this is no excuse, but they're doing what they're told to do. But there are some good teachers out there, but unfortunately, I think a lot of them know that what they're doing isn't the right thing. I've spoken to a lot of teachers, so we need more teachers to speak up.
Yes.
And that's why I'm running for fair go.
We do have a few, but they're not heard. They're not heard either, unfortunately.
You know, that's why I've decided to put my name up with fair go and to run in the upcoming state election for the upper house seat, because, and I'm working on policies which I'm hoping will come up soon. I've written one policy with fair go in South Australia, which gives the parents the option to opt their child in rather than opt out.
Yes.
It's made in biological truth and age appropriate. So that's what I want to base it on. And, you know, and a parental oversight on the resources. That's what I want to do. So that's, I think that's necessary. I think if the school governing councils, they have, or school boards, I think parents should be looking and overseeing the teacher resources. Public libraries, that's another issue. You know, if they really stuck to, if books ever do get classification, a lot of these books that I found that if they were in a film or documentary, I would have to classify the film or documentary in accordance to film and documentary, film and games classification. And some of those books would be R-rated because of the nudity.
Yeah. Angela, I'm sorry, we're going to have to go. We're running out of time. I didn't want to stop you, but we do have to go. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything you've done and that you are doing. And I hope we can get you back on to update us on what's happening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. You take care.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Something was wrong, we felt it inside. Something told us do not comply. Turn off the news, turn off the TV. It's time to think, get off your knees. We tried to warn loved ones, oh did we try? We tried to save lives, but we were denied. Sadly we failed and many of them died. We were kicked to the side, we did not hide. We took to the streets, we would not comply. Our conscience told us this was the world's largest lie. At first we were few, but we shortly grew. Melbourne streets saw sights that had never been seen. We fought for our rights, for all to be free. People thrown to the ground, pepper spray to the face. No matter what age, we were locked up and caged. Then the guns came out, they had no care. They shot their own people, running in fear, unarmed and peaceful. We stood for our rights, they would not stop us. We would not give up the fight. We were locked out of cafes, our families withdrew. No Christmas, no birthdays, no celebrations we knew. We were germs, enemies, a danger to you. You watched the counts on mainstream news. No further would you look, we were all cooked. Deluded, brainwashed, segregation we lived through, whilst you lived your life without any clue. People thrown to the ground, pepper spray to the face. No matter what age, we were locked up and caged. Then the guns came out, they had no care. They shot their own people, running in fear, unarmed and peaceful. We stood for our rights, they would not stop us. We would not give up the fight. Something told us do not comply.